When we think of dictatorships, we often think of one powerful figure at the very top of the chain of command, someone like Adolf Hitler. But dictators don't act alone. In episode 1, when I described what a dictatorship was, I asked a really important question. Why doesn't the public rebel? One reason is because they feel outnumbered and do not have the resources to overthrow government systems. But another reason I want to highlight in this episode is that there is almost always a small elite that supports new propaganda by convincing ordinary people they can trust it. Once the public trusts the new system, it's easy to convince them to carry out their political ideology in education, industries, etc. This slow integration of new ideology and cultures is called indoctrination. Today's episode of Cesar explores how indoctrination under dictatorships can drive ordinary people to cruelty, and we're going to look at one unsettling case specifically, Irma Gries. Irma Gries wasn't a dictator or the personal curator of Nazi ideology. She was a camp guard, but her story raises an uncomfortable question. How does someone become capable of cruelty inside a dictatorship? Greece grew up during the rise of the Nazi regime in Germany. Schools increasingly reflected Nazi ideology, youth organizations promoted loyalty to the state, and obedience to authority was praised more than questioning ethics. When a government controls education, media, and cultural standards, it shapes the identity of the individual consuming it. I mean, think about it for a second. Without all of the social and cultural influences we are exposed to in the world, we would be a blank state. And we technically are blank slates when we're young, waiting for something to inform us on the way of the world. It wasn't different for Irma. If you were told trees could sign language through its branches from your parents, if you were told it at school and in your community, this is just a hypothetical, then you're likely to believe it. So in Irma's case, she was taught to see the world under Nazi ideology, so it seems fitting that she took pride in it as it became a part of her identity. Under dictatorships, indoctrination works in layers. First, dehumanization is normalized. Certain groups are portrayed as inferior or dangerous. Second, compliance is rewarded. Loyalty brings status, power, and most importantly, privilege to those who oblige. Lastly, this newly granted privilege removes accountability from instigators and people who spread propaganda for the government. In this way, actions can be framed as simply following orders. In an environment like this, cruelty can be institutionalized rather than out of personal spite against someone or a group of people. We start to see how unchecked power without accountability changes behavior. The new government had the means and resources to put out this propaganda that reduced the overall empathy of the public. And in psychology, there's something called a group identity, where people who strongly associate with the group or culture will allow the values of that culture override their moral compass. But how did these factors affect the violence Nazi concentration camp guard Irma Gries was willing to inflict? Well, survivors describe Gries as strikingly beautiful and well taken care of, which is a stark contrast to her cruel nature. Irma was a woman of privilege during this time and embodied the idea that compliance is rewarded even when it hurts others. Her privilege gave her a false sense of security, even when she was sentenced to death. During her court trials, she defended herself against the charges, saying, "Himmler, a Nazi politician, is responsible for everything that has happened, but I suppose I am as much to blame as the others above me." But throughout the trial, Gries was said to be cold, arrogant, and unremorseful, which shows how dictatorial regimes can break people's sense of empathy. I think the most important takeaway from this episode on dictatorships is the idea that not all monsters are born. Rather, they are created from their exposure to certain experiences. Well, that wraps up today's topic on Irma Gries and the role indoctrination has on dictatorial regimes. I hope you'll join us for next week's episode, but until then, I'm Layla. Thank you for tuning in to yet another episode of Cesar.